Hey everyone, it's Matthias. Today I'm sitting down with Brandan Robertson, the author of the new book Nomad, Sexuality for Traveling Light. He's an author, an activist, blogger, doing a lot of incredible things in the world. So excited to share my conversation with him. But first, a couple things. This fall, I'm going to be attending a variety of conferences. I will be at Why Christian in Chicago at the end of September, and then the Reformation Project in Long Beach, California at the end of October. So if you're going to be at either one of those conferences and see me, come over, say hi. We can grab coffee or something. It will be great. And then I'm going to be keynoting the Generous Space West Coast Retreat in Hope, BC, Canada. So if any of y'all are on this side of the country, the West Coast, either in the US or up in Canada, and want a weekend away in November, come join us. It's going to be an incredible retreat. Like I said, I'll be speaking, and it'll just be a great time to rest, recuperate, and just enjoy the fellowship of other LGBT Christians and allies. So mark your calendars for those, and hopefully I'll see you at some of those. And without further ado, I always say that. Here's my conversation with Brandan. Brandan, hey.
Hey there.
How are you?
I'm doing so well. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thanks for having me.
Of course, welcome. So you just got off of a giant speaking tour in the UK for your new book, Nomad. For people who aren't super familiar with you or your work, could you talk a little bit about the new book and what led you to writing it and the process behind all of that?
Yeah, totally. Basically this book, Nomad, has been something I've been kind of dreaming about for years. When I first became a Christian when I was 12, I felt called to be a pastor within 4 months of that, and I've always grown up in megachurches, so pastors always wrote books, and I just, since 12 years old, had always dreamed of writing a book, and I've been self-publishing books for years, terrible books that nobody should ever read, but yeah, so at the end of my Bible college career, my senior year of college, a publisher reached out. They were a Pentecostal publisher, and they had been reading my blog, which was about basically being a millennial progressive evangelical. And they said, hey, we want you to write a book about your journey and about what you think millennial spirituality will look like. And I was blown away and surprised and really excited. And so I started writing what became Nomad back in 2013. And yeah, it ended up being an unexpected journey over the next few years. It took me about a year to write, and it was just, basically I talk in the book about what happened to me in the 4 years of Bible college, which was I entered in as a fundamentalist evangelical, and by the time I left, I was really disenchanted with the whole evangelical system. Right. I experienced so much fear and marginalization because I was willing to ask questions, and it was just so baffling to me that the more I tried to be faithful by asking questions and talking to people that held different perspectives, because I believe that's what Jesus would have had me do, the more my evangelical community came out against me. And that's really the message of Nomad, was me moving from this strict boundaried system of religion to kind of what I call the vast terrain of spirituality. And yeah, so I graduated, was writing about that, took about a year to write the book, and then I turned it into the publisher in February of 2015, and when I turned in the manuscript, they said, we love it, it looks great, but we're having some problems getting the Christian book buying industry to buy the book so that we can sell it in Christian bookstores and other places. And they said, so what we're going to ask you to do is we need you to sign a statement that says you unequivocally condemn homosexuality. And by this point in my life, I had been wrestling with my own sexuality and been very public, at least, about supporting marriage equality. Never public about being LGBT, or even, I still thought it was sinful, really, at this period of my life. But I said to them, yeah, I don't think I can sign this statement because I don't believe what you want me to believe
Right.
about this, even though I was unsure.
Mm.
And so they ended up dropping the book deal, and to my surprise, within a matter of 24 hours, a Time magazine reporter wrote an article about it. And in that article, she identified me for the first time publicly as queer. And so this article about my book being lost and kind of my public outing happened all at the same time. And yeah, that impacted the book now. The book that I have now that's just been released ended up getting picked up by a publisher in the UK about a year later after all of that. And I've gone back. Before the book didn't talk about sexuality at all. Now it's got an introductory chapter kind of telling this story, and then a chapter on sexuality. But yeah, it's out now, and it's finally in the world, and I'm just glad that it's been released. And after all this crazy journey, it's just good to have it out in the world. So.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, because that was a several-year process of all of that. Like, that's... to finally hold it in your hands, like, that's huge.
Yeah, crazy. And I didn't get to see it until I was... I didn't get to see the final book until I was in Wales. And so I got Wales on this book tour, and one of the guys that was hosting me handed me a copy, and it was just... It was not as crazy as you would think it was, but it was also this experience of just... Again, kind of a sigh of relief, because after all of the turns that this has taken, it's just good that when you work so hard at something, and you know this, it's so good to finally just have it out in the world and just be done and be able to move on to something else.
Right.
But,
yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. So I just read the chapter on othering that you wrote about, and you kind of hinted on this in your story, but that process of being in fundamentalism, in a fundamentalist Christian, and how, as you started asking those questions, you started to move into the territory of being the other, the excluded, and I'm curious about that because you have a beautiful message in that chapter around othering and a vision, I think, for Christianity of what a more inclusive Christianity looks like. Would you be willing to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. I think, for me, very early on, one of my mentors was a guy named Dr. David Anderson, and his whole message is about building bridges. And so from a very young age, I kind of was instilled with this message about building bridges to those we disagree with. And then very quickly I found out that that actually wasn't something that many Christians wanted to engage in. And actually in that chapter about othering, I tell a proverb that Dr. Anderson told me, and it goes something like, when I saw you from a distance, I thought you were a monster. Then you got closer and I saw that you were a human. And then when we were finally face to face, I saw that you were my brother. And that really became the journey for me. I remember, you can go back on Facebook. You know how Facebook these days gives you those memories every day.
Right.
And I saw it recently, about maybe 6-7 years ago. I posted a picture of one of Brian McLaren's books and wrote this long thing about how it was damaging to the church and just so dangerous. And to be honest, when I posted that picture, I hadn't read a single chapter of the book. I checked it out from the library and had it sitting there. Right. But I had heard all of these things about Brian McLaren, and I was going to try to read it, and I don't think I actually ever did. But again, it was that idea of, from a distance, I was told that Brian McLaren was this monster. He was a heretic. His message was a false gospel.
Right.
And what ended up happening was, about 2 years after that experience, I'm in college, and I have a radio show, and I get to interview him. And I hear him on the phone, and I'm just so stunned by his compassion and his Christ-likeness. And then in real life now, getting to know Brian one-on-one and seeing that he's truly one of the most Christ-like and loving, and just he embodies the Christian faith in a way that nobody else I know does. He is the example I use everywhere, and in the book and everywhere I talk, just because in our world, he was just seen as somebody he was judged based on what people heard about him, based on what people saw from a distance. They heard he had a gay son, so that must mean if he's not condemning his gay son, then he's whatever. And so much of our Christian faith is about that. I mean, beyond Brian, it was the Catholics worship Mary and are the great whore of Babylon. And the Mormons are believe they're going to have their own planets one day and they don't know anything about Jesus. And you just hear all these things about different people. And it's that kind of distant judging that causes what I think we have in our nation right now, which is Donald Trump. Being able to stand up and talk about immigrants and Mexicans and all these other people, and he says they're rapists and terrorists. Well, all of this is judging this disembodied fake group of people that he's never standing face-to-face with and actually talking. And we know that if he did stand face-to-face with the majority of the immigrants in this country, he'd find they weren't terrorists and rapists, but hard-working people. And I think Donald Trump is really a symptom of the Christian culture that we've created that has to have an oppositional identity. We are not them. They're our enemy. And I just think the way of Jesus is one where we actually say, if we love our enemy, then we can stand in solidarity with our enemy, and then very soon they don't become our enemy anymore. We might disagree. We might fundamentally disagree, maybe not be able to fellowship, but they don't have to be our enemy. They can be our brothers and sisters someday we have a disagreement with. So that's just kind of what I talk about in that chapter, and it's really the center point of my entire spiritual journey. And it's just learning that people aren't always what they seem, and that we're all much more united and have much more in common than we ever have different.
Absolutely. Yeah. And now you have a Brian McLaren quote on the cover of your book.
The kiss of death on the front of my book. No conservative will ever read this book now, but
So with that, I mean, you made movement in your views on sexuality, gender identity, all of that through that process, and you've now started Nomad Partnerships, which is an organization that you're working to bring change in the church around LGBT issues. And back in April, y'all hosted this event, Our Witness, that I spoke at, along with a bunch of other LGBT Christian leaders. And it was a beautiful event. Thank you again for hosting that. But you have some more stuff coming up around that. And it's some really exciting things that are happening there.
I think, Nomad Partnerships, we're in the season. I mean, I just created this nonprofit to kind of just be, this is probably a bad analogy to use, but a junk drawer for all of the things that I'm passionate about. And so we're actually expanding a little bit even beyond LGBT to more interfaith and human rights kind of things. But one of our core missions is still to try to end this process of othering by exposing Christians to the stories of LGBT Christians. Because, I mean, just the impetus for Our Witness, that whole idea for me was when I graduated at Moody Bible Institute, I began hearing that professors were telling students about me and saying I was this great gay heretic and like saying all these terrible things that just weren't true. And I kept having this like nagging feeling that I need to go back to Moody and be on campus so that people can see me there and see that I'm not what I'm being made out to be. They need to hear my story and see my life. And so we did that with the Our Witness conference. We did an Our Witness blog a little while ago, which used Christian gay people in Christian colleges. We told their stories. And now we've gotten this really exciting opportunity I'm going to be pulling together stories from around the world, really, of LGBT Christians from diverse backgrounds, races, religious identities, pulling us together to tell our stories in a series of about 20 to 30 essays that will be in a book called Our Witness, The Unheard Stories of LGBT Christians. And this great publisher, Cascade Books, Whipton has just agreed to kind of put together this big collection of stories, which my hope is that each person whose story is told in this book will then take it and it will go into their networks and begin to cultivate empathic understanding for people that might not ever want to meet an LGBT person because they're too fearful right now, but they can meet us on the pages of this book, which will tell our story and challenge the church to at least begin to listen and acknowledge that we're here and we exist and we matter. And so, yeah, we're just in the beginning stages of that. Just put out an open call today for people to submit essay ideas, and hopefully by mid to late 2017, we'll have this book out in the world somewhere. So
exciting. So exciting. Yeah, so if people were interested in contributing an essay to that, or an essay idea to that, how would they do that?
Yeah, I think the easiest way is if you go to brandanrobertson.com, there's a little tab, I think it says projects, and if you go down to the last box on projects, it says Our Witness Book, and there you can just fill out, it's a very basic short form where I just find out a bit about you, and then we have a couple people that are going to sit down and go through the names with me and go through the stories with me, and see if we can pick out 20 or 30 out of the bunch to put out there in the world. And so I would love and encourage people to send as many stories as we can.
That's awesome. It's really exciting.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. And as always, it's a pleasure.
Yes, absolutely. I so appreciate you and your voice in the world. So thank you.
Likewise, yeah. Thank you, Brandan.
Awesome.
So there you go. Head over to Amazon.com if you want to pick up a copy of Nomad. It's an excellent book. I would highly recommend it. And if you're interested in submitting an essay to Brandan's next book project, Our Witness, definitely go check that out, brandanrobertson.com, and submit an essay idea for that. Be sure to subscribe to my channel, and I will see you all later.